Hey folks, Mark here. If you don't know me, I'm a scientist and I've worked in the biotech and pharma industry for about the last 10 years. And I wanted to come on to talk a little bit about the idea of work-life balance. It's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. I think it's something that is very looked at very differently between different generations. I think older generations of people, Gen X, boomers, they look at work as something where you got to put your time in, you got to earn your stripes, and eventually it'll get paid off. And I think younger generations, especially Gen Z, look at work as something where it's necessary, sort of a necessary evil, but you shouldn't be loyal to companies because they're not going to be loyal to you. And I'm not necessarily wanting to offer advice, but just some of my experiences for someone who's worked in the corporate world and in science in particular, and some of how I've changed my perspective on that over time. So just rewinding a little bit, I finished up my PhD and graduated in the end of 2015. And after that, I moved into working in the industry. First in St. Louis, and then ultimately I moved out to Boston because it's a, sort of a concentrated area of biotech and pharma, and there was a lot of job opportunity for me here. So that was a really good move for me. I think that it opened up a lot of opportunities. I was able to take new roles that were really exciting, but I think I had a very unhealthy perspective on work-life balance or on career in general. For the better part of the first 5 or 6 years after I graduated, I was so laser focused on getting ahead, getting promoted, making more money that it was very unhealthy for me. I was not focused on other aspects of my life. I was in a position where I was gaining a lot of weight. It was, work and this sort of obsession with getting ahead was really taking over my thoughts. I was take a shower in the morning and, I'd be thinking about what can I do to get ahead? How can I sort of outcompete other people to get the next opportunity? I'd be looking at people that were in my cohort that I graduated with. And, if they had a bigger title than me, I'd think, oh, what do I have to do to get to that level, to get to that title? I've got to keep up and be the best. And, it came from a place of wanting financial stability, really, at the end of the day, is what it was. And certainly there were good things that came out of that. I was able to get ahead in my career and, make a bigger salary, which was great, pay down my student debts. And ultimately, my husband and I were able to put a down payment on this house, which is something that I think, feel very fortunate for. I know a lot of people who are millennials and younger, really struggling to buy houses in this economy. So I'm very grateful for that. But it came at a big cost too. I've talked about this privately a lot, which is that there was a period of time where I was so stressed and fixated on work that it was having other negative health impacts. I was grinding my teeth so much that it was causing dental problems. I needed to have a couple of crowns and a bunch of fillings done because I was just grinding my teeth to dust. And it was very unhealthy for me overall. The other thing that occurred to me after a period of time was the impact it was having not only on my health, but on my social life and my friendships. I moved to uh, Boston in 2017, and sometime, at the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, I stopped and I looked around and realized that everyone I knew in Boston, virtually everyone I knew, I had met because I worked with them or somehow through a work affiliated thing, I knew them, some sort of work connection. Everyone that I knew here. And that was kind of alarming. It made me stop and think this work persona has become my whole identity. And that was scary and alarming. And it made me stop and pause and reevaluate my approach and to really start thinking about what is it that's really important to me in life? Who is it that I want to be? Work and career are something that's still important to me. It's still a part of my identity. It's something I've spent a lot of time in training on. And I really believe in, as a scientist, being able to make new discoveries and develop new products and solutions for health problems that didn't exist before. And there's sort of I see that as good for society as a whole and something I'm really proud of. But I don't want that to be my entire personality. So, at that point, I decided to turn things around and take a slightly different tack. And part of what helped me realize that was when I switched jobs. I switched from the job where I was extremely stressed and, was having all those health problems associated with it. I remember I was, losing sleep, stressing about some test we were developing for a clinical study, right? So the timelines on it or something like that. And I put in my 2 weeks, left that job, and went to a different job. And the second that I handed in my resignation note, all of that stress went away. Because now all of those things that had been my problem, that I was losing sleep over, that I was stressing about all the time, in an instant were no longer my problem. And so now, as I try to rethink balance and rethink what career means to me and where I place it in my life, I try to keep that in mind, to think if I'm getting overly stressed about something, that, put it in that perspective, that if I didn't have this job, it would no longer be stressful. And so, it helps to, on the one hand, take my work seriously, but not take it so seriously that it's going to really jeopardize my health and my well-being and my relationships outside of work. So how do I think about work now? It's slightly different. I mean, I think that both generations get it a little bit wrong, at least the stereotypes of how, boomers and Gen Z think about work. Because from my perspective, work-life balance is very important, but it's not necessarily the case that you're going to be able to achieve 50-50 all the time. I mean, my perspective on it is that if you want to get new opportunities, advance in your career, learn new things, there are periods of time where you do have to lock in, and you're going to have to put in extra effort and time. And, that's because that's just the nature of the world. Sometimes things kind of all fall at once and you got to get it done. And by being the person who will step up and take responsibility, you become the person who gets more of those opportunities in the future, or gets more of that responsibility and gets recognized for that with greater roles or compensation or whatever. And you kind of have to have that experience to justify those things. So there are periods of time, I believe, where you do have to focus. But if that becomes all the time, if it's this grind set all the time, then it becomes unsustainable. And that is where it's a huge problem. Similarly, I think there are periods in your career where things slow down. Maybe there's just a period at your job where it's less busy and you have more time to spend with your family and friends. And, you should be thinking about how that time can recharge you and, fuel those periods where it is more intense. But I think that the more important thing than that even is, in my mind, what I think is most important now is thinking through, if you are focusing and if you are spending a lot of time and personal energy on your career and what you're working on, what is it that you're doing? And does that serve you and your goals overall? Or are you just working really hard and compromising your own health for somebody else to make a lot of money? That is what I think we should all avoid if we can. I know that not everyone has that luxury, but the way I would think about this is, every person is like the CEO of their own one-person company. And you should be thinking about, what are your long-term goals and how are the things that you're doing now building into that? Now, not everything is going to be one-to-one, but ideally you should be picking up the skills, the connections, the experience that help you build towards where you want to be in your career. It's a little bit a more complicated perspective than just follow your passions and have fun. I don't think that's realistic. I mean, I think even if you're doing something that you're very passionate about and is ultimately very rewarding for you, that doesn't mean it's going to be fun all the time. Like, work can sometimes just be work. But at the end of it, the satisfaction of knowing you completed something can make that worthwhile. So I guess with all that in mind, the way that I would look at it, work-life balance, is not as you're going for 50-50, this is the number of hours you work and this is the number of hours that you rest. I would instead think about it from the perspective of, what are your goals in life? Not only for your career, but also for your personal life. What kind of relationships do you aim to have? Romantic relationships, friendships. How do you aim to build those? Those are just as important for your health and for your life as work is. And how can you arrange your life and the things that you do in such a way that you are able to service both in the ways that they need? And accept that there are going to be periods of time where maybe you have to focus more on your family, or you have to focus more on work to get through a particularly tough time. But also having the cognizance to look at your situation and say whether or not it serves your ultimate goals. If you're grinding away at a job for more money, but that money isn't going to materially change your life, it's worth asking yourself, why are you doing it? My perspective in the last 10 years on work has changed really dramatically. And now I'm trying to focus my time and energy on things that to me are more personally meaningful and not necessarily focusing on um, title and money and prestige, and instead focus on what matters to me, and placing that same importance on my family, my relationships, and being able to sort of have the fully actualized life that I want to have on all sides, and not become a slave essentially to my career and to the things that previously were controlling me. So I hope folks found this perspective interesting. I'd love to hear in the comments, what your interests are, what your perspective is on work-life balance and on career and how you've approached it. And maybe if you're starting out, what would you like to know? What do you wish you knew? So drop a like, drop a comment in the below the video, and I'll take a look and maybe make a follow-up video to answer some of those if we get enough. So with that, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and take care.